dynamic and intense work, and it's hard to do. But I tell you this because now that I'm retired and I see, for example, corruption at the state and county government level, where we have sheriffs on the take and county commissioners going to jail for taking bribes, and they're in federal prisons now. Just do an internet search on Palm Beach County or Miami-Dade or some of these other places. You all know what I'm talking about. Where's the feds when these happen? There's things going on in the county I live in right now. We got widespread corruption. Nobody's doing anything about it because it just doesn't get to the level that feds can pay attention to that. If the feds are really doing their jobs and they're doing it right, they are thinking transnational issues and national issues only. They're not getting involved in state and local issues unless there's some reason they ought to be involved in it. So if you've ever thought to yourself, why don't the feds ever get involved in this? It probably just doesn't come up high enough on their radar screen for them to pay attention to it. Everyone here can tell you a story like this. It's something that I had people ask me about a lot in my career, and I thought I'd just tell you about that. Andy made a comment about search warrants and dealing with judges. I wanted to tell you about a Kodak moment that I had with one. For 5 years straight, the NASA OIG, the organization I built in this computer crimes division, we trained all federal prosecutors in the United States jointly with the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property Division. I did that because I was selfish. I wanted my cases prosecuted, and I wanted every prosecutor in the country to know who we were, and I wanted them to know that we were good and perhaps the best, and it worked. I had every case prosecuted, and I took them to NASA centers down at Kennedy Space Center, had them bring their families for space shuttle launches. We had good relationships. One of these prosecutors called me up one day after one of these joint tech agent prosecutor training sessions, and he said, "Tom, I want to tell you a war story. I presented one of your agents' search warrant requests to Judge so-and-so in this circuit last night. And normally when relations are good between a judge and a prosecutor, the judge will say, if he trusts the prosecutor, do I need to read this? The law says he's got to read it, but people work on the basis of networking and personal relationships. He says, do I need to read this? He says, Judge, it's all right, but I want you to read it. So the judge took this search warrant request, which talks about in not technically technical detail, but in enough detail to understand the technical process, what these intruders were doing, how they were doing it, and why it's a problem, and why we needed this search warrant. And this is the judge's words. He looked at the prosecutor and he said, Bill, I read the search warrant request. It was very clear. I understood it, but I don't understand it. And what he's really saying is that step-by-step synaptic connection between all the little facts to build that search warrant request, he just couldn't retain them. If you've ever asked yourself the question, why do we have cybercrime and why is it that people don't get it, remember that story. Another quick story for you. Romania. In early 1990, middle of a heavy snowfall, there was nobody around. I got a call at NASA headquarters about intruders breaking into the Goddard Space Flight Center out in Greenbelt, Maryland. I went out, talked to the incident response folks, listened to what they had to say. Turns out an intruder came in from Romania, broke into this server that had 300 accounts on it and stole all this advanced technology research data and took it right back to Romania. This is the early days of this kind of crime. No concealment courses, no conduit paths, just straight back to Romania to a university institute. After I found out what happened, I went in to go talk to the project scientist about this. Showed him my credentials, told him who I was, why I was there, gave him a rundown on the intrusion. This is the middle of the winter. It was about 10 feet of snow outside. He's sitting up with Bermuda shorts and sandals at his desk. He's got a light on his desk shining up in the corner, and I asked him what he's doing. He said he was studying the refractive aspects of light. So I told him, I gave him a briefing. This is what the intruder did. He came in, he broke in this way. I told him all the details. How he got root access to your system, and everything he took, which was vast quantities of intellectual property. And the scientist listened very, very carefully, and when I got finished, he said to me, why, Tom, that's wonderful. You mean to tell me somebody came here all the way from Romania to look at my scientific work? I mean, I'm one of the leading authorities in the world in this field, and he named the field. NASA's lucky to have me. And I immediately thought, okay, we're gonna have a communications challenge here. So I thought, since I'm a philosophy major from way back, I thought I'd employ the Socratic method. And I said, let me get this straight. You're one of the leading scientists in the world on this field, and I named the field. He says, right. And I said, I'll bet as a scientist, since you're a PhD, you have to publish a lot of papers on this stuff. He said, right. And I said, I'll bet there's conferences for people like you that you go to where they want to hear what you have to say. He says, oh, there are. And I said, can you name me some? He says, there's two big ones. And he named them. One was in Paris in the spring, and the other one was in Singapore in the fall. I said, okay. And I'll bet that there's times you can't afford to go, knowing the budget cuts we have here at the agency, so I'll bet that you probably have to get them to pay your travel on invitational travel orders. He says, that's right. And I said, I'll bet they can't wait to hear what you have to say. He said, they can't. That's why they do that. I said, so okay, let me ask you this. Where's the next conference now? It's January. I said, so the next conference is in Paris, right? He said, right. I said, okay, so what are you gonna do? And what are you gonna say when you show up in Paris this spring and a scientist from Romania gets up and presents your scientific work as his? And he sat back and he gave me that deer in the headlights look for about 20 long seconds. They were long seconds for me. And he finally said to me, you know something? Your work is important. How can I help you? And I could tell you 10 stories more like that, but I think you see the point.
If you see Tom in the bar tonight, you get the others. You get 10 stories.
I mean, people ask me all the time. Some people asked me today in the earlier panel, why does cybercrime occur? It occurs because you're not thinking about it. People want to get on their computers and they want to use them, and they want it to be like their car. They want it to start up and they want to go from point A to point B. They don't want to think about how it works, and you shouldn't have to. But while you're on the keyboard typing a message, an email to somebody could be coming across the network the other way and exploiting you. And so I found from this and other cases that I worked at NASA that in order to get the attention of people about why we're victimized, I had to personalize the attacks. I had others where people lost their entire credits, lives, their savings because of hackers that were NASA employees. And for the sake of brevity, I won't tell those. Other folks have stories they want to tell too. But that's why cybercrime occurs, and the only way we're going to fix it is when it becomes personal to people. And unless it's personal, it's just an institutional problem and it's too abstract for people. Jerry, you want me to keep telling war stories, or you're going to keep going around again?
Let me I guess, there's one or two I want to add in there as well.
Okay, good.
So, how many of you worked incident response or worked in a security operations center? So, as you know, we get a lot of interesting phone calls and a lot of, suspect incidents. And I remember, and Andy might even remember this one. This is back at IRS. This is back during when the 9/11 commission hearings were taking place and a lot of things were happening. Well, at the IRS at the time, they had just rolled out the latest version of Microsoft Office. At this particular location where we were at, we had several thousand employees, and everything from accountants, obviously, IRS to secretaries, IT support staff, what have you. And so, again, of course, these calls always come in on a Friday. We get a call saying, hey, I believe somebody's on my computer. So, the analyst on the floor is taking this information. He's like, well, what do you mean? Well, when I'm in Microsoft Word, it just starts typing stuff, and I believe it's a terrorist. So you're thinking, okay, so why do you think it's a terrorist? Well, because in Microsoft Word, as I'm typing my document for my boss, terrorist pops in, bomb type pops up on my screen, and I'm not typing it. And we're like, okay, this is going to be kind of interesting. So, we're like, okay, well, you know what? We're going to send somebody down there to take a look at it and see what the heck's going on. So we go down there, looked at the machine, nothing's happening. Again, we're asking the person, why do you think a terrorist is in your computer, and why just your computer? She was giving us an explanation. Over the weekend and the next few days, nothing happens. We told her to keep an eye on it. Of course, we're back here looking at logs and trying to see is there anything leaving the network and doing all the things that incident response teams do and security folks. Phone rings again. It goes, they're on it again. So we rush down there thinking, maybe we can actually see this thing in action. So we're sitting there in the cube, and sure enough, words are just popping up in Word, and we're thinking, wow, this is kind of interesting. And then looking around at our desk was a radio. And again, we just had a new hardware, new laptops, new version of Microsoft Office rolled out. So we're listening to the radio, and it was actually the 9/11 hearings, using words like terrorists, bombs. And what it was, by default, when the IT teams were rolling out these machines, the microphone was the speech to text was enabled. So, we spent huge amount of hours in trying to figure out what in the world's going on, and, we're looking, like, all right, what the heck's really going on? So that's kind of one of the stories that we dealt with back in the days. That was kind of fun. But, I mean, it took, again, a few days to figure out what's going on, something simple. But, I mean, the good news part of that is that she actually did call the operational security team or the incident response team. On another note, and this one's probably just more background into government operations at U.S. CERT. Well, let me ask this question to the audience. Do you think U.S. CERT, and I know I'm sticking my neck out here, but it's been almost 3 years since I've been there, so I can do this. So do you think the alerts and the vulnerability advisories and things coming out are timely enough for you or your organization? Raise your hand if you think they are. Okay, so, the real issue behind the scenes is, believe it or not, a lot of times that information is ready to go. There's a lot of people that get involved in this. And someday, for a while, there was a period of time we were able to crank those things and get them out the door. But the thing that we found out is that the media and other organizations would take a lot of those advisories that were coming out and it would get overly hyped. So what happens is that the secretary of DHS, the undersecretary at DHS, or even the White House would be like, what's this thing over here? And should I be concerned about it because it was in the news or I just came across it? So what happened is a lot of new processes got added and a lot of additional approvals had to get put into place to be able to just push out a simple vulnerability advisory. And again, it doesn't move in an operational tempo. The folks there are doing their best on the US CERT team and other places trying to get that information out, but you're beholden to the direction that you're receiving from on high. So just to provide perspective, they're not going to be timely as many of us would like them to be. But that's because you got to manage up, and a lot of times you're going to get a lot of interesting phone calls from a lot of very senior folks on some of these things. So I know, Andy, you had something you wanted to add in there to.
Well, there's one thing real quick, Jerry, I'd like to add. That's one of the reasons I registered the domain name Red Tape Will Not Defeat Terrorism. But I'm having second thoughts about that, because if they had to deal with some of the red tape that I saw during my 20 years plus in government service, I think we could defeat them handily, quite honestly. I can just hear a meeting now. Well, we've got to have a meeting. We've got to run this through at least 4 line managers and that kind of thing. And I'm very serious about that, and we need to work very hard on that, I think. And I understand what Jerry says because I've never been in a management position. But we've got to do the kind of thing that John and his people have done. We're out there with the Avons and the inflatables with the 200 horsepower motors on it, while the fleet is cruising around with these battleships and cruisers and that kind of thing. And we need to learn how to move more quickly and be more agile and serve the public that we deserve to give our best service.
Well, I think John could probably take that red tape and use it to his advantage somehow. I don't know. Against the bad guys.
Yeah, I was going to tell you another story, but I think I should tell you a joke before I tell you the actual story. So a guy goes to a psychiatrist and said, Doc, I can't sleep at night. Every time I get in bed, I'm afraid there's monsters under there, and if I try to step out, they're going to grab me and pull me down. So the doctor says, well, let me think about this and come back next week, and hopefully I'll have a cure put together for you. So the next week goes by, and he doesn't show up, and the week after that, and about 4 weeks later, the doctor happens to run into this guy at the mall, and he walks up and says, hey, I thought you were going to come back for some treatment. And the guy said, I'm sorry, Doc, I'm cured. I didn't need to come back. And the doctor said, well, that's fantastic. How did you get cured? He said, well, my brother-in-law did it. And he says, was your brother-in-law a psychiatrist? And he says, no, he's a carpenter. He cut the legs off my bed. Now the monsters won't fit underneath it. So along those same lines, we deal with a lot of crazies. I used to have a large feed of email that I used to have to look at every day for threats, because there are some people that would actually threaten the IRS. I know that's hard to believe, but we would get those. But we'd also get people that were saying they were hijacked by aliens and everything else. And I was usually pretty good at being able to spot schizophrenics, the kind of people that are just so friggin' out there that you can look at their letter and know that they just either skipped their medication or they need to double it. And I had one guy one day that was just writing us nonstop. And the curiosity finally got the best of me. So, using an anonymized phone, because I didn't want him calling me back or anything, If I did, I would have said it was the FBI. But I called him and, I said, are you really as crazy as you're writing? And he said, yes. I said, okay, well, that's good to know. I got like 600 other emails the next 2 weeks following that. with the same kind of garbage. And it's interesting because anybody that's ever had to deal with the public, it sucks. Especially if you have to be politically correct, which is kind of against my nature.